All right, so let's get started. I just want to introduce our guests. On my left is Chris Meledandri. He's the founder and CEO of Illumination, the studio that created all these great films that you just saw. And to his left is Jeff Shell, the chairman of the Universal Filmed Entertainment Group. And the theme of this session is creativity, and we're going to be talking about what does it mean to run a creative business in 2017. And I think it's a particularly interesting question for Hollywood and the entertainment industry right now, given all the challenges that it's going through due to changes in technology, all of these new devices that have given us new ways to watch all our movies and television shows. Jeff, could you start by just kind of laying the land and giving us a picture of what those challenges are?
Well, everything's changing, as you said, and as your magazine covers. First of all, thanks for having us here today. So it is, everything is kind of breaking down and everything is changing, which is both exciting and frightening at the same time. You can watch things increasingly on every device, in every place, in every way in which you want to watch things. And all the traditional ways of viewing content, movies, TV, are changing. And in one sense, that is great for us because the more people that can see our movies, this tremendous creativity in as many different places as possible is great. On the other hand, all the assumptions are off now as far as, you know, when you're in the TV business, how many episodes and how long the episodes are. And then in the movie business, how do you break through all that clutter? How do you find a way, both creatively and from a marketing perspective, to introduce your movie to people in that just sea of great things to watch? So I think it's going to be great for the business, but it certainly is frightening in a lot of ways.
And Chris, as a creative, I'd argue that your biggest challenge is just coming up with a story and characters that are going to engage audiences, you know, not just for one film, but several. Can you talk about that? I mean, where do you start when you...
Well, different movies have different points of origin. You know, going all the way back to Ice Age, that started with the notion of just making a movie set against the backdrop of the Ice Age, and then we moved from there, and Despicable Me started with a very thin story. Pets was a concept. So the starting points are wildly varied. But for us, the heart of what determines our commitment to a movie is really the story of the characters. And it is that relationship with character that the audience forms within the confines of a cinema or watching it at home. That relationship that you leave that film with is really going to be the indicator of the afterlife of the movie. The immediate afterlife, whether it's, you know, home entertainment or, you know, merchandising or the potential for sequel. And so our core focus at Illumination is creating characters that are appealing, characters that are flawed, and characters that are relatable, which is maybe the most important thing. Characters who are going through different experiences, where as an audience member, you can project yourself into that character's perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the most memorable characters are the Minions. How did you ever come up with this idea of this yellow pill-shaped thing that spouts gibberish in, I don't know what language that is?
Well, I'd like to, you know, the Minions are really unique to the process of animation. Animation is this visual medium first and foremost, and even though, you know, we labor over stories and scripts, that ultimately these movies come to life visually, and the Minions were born out of a character design. It was born out of a desire to find henchmen for Gru that would be unlike any cliche of a henchman that we have seen before. So that challenge in animation is then given to an artist. And the artists begin to draw. And so the idea of the Minions was born out of the design work of Eric Guillon, who was the art director on Minions. And then our directors started to invest in that design, feelings and ideas, and the language itself, which was initially completely stream of consciousness, coming largely from one of our two directors of Despicable Me, Pierre Coffin, eventually has developed into somewhat of a quasi-language. Of course, when you have characters that are language agnostic, like the Minions are, they become characters that travel globally in the most amazing way, because they belong to no culture. They're of all cultures, and everybody can have the exact same experience, whether you're in China or in Chicago.
And Jeff, I mean, another challenge, I guess, in this culture is marketing. And how do you reach these audiences that might not be sitting in the theater anymore, seeing the trailer for your film, or maybe they're DVRing through it at home? How are you being forced to kind of think out of the box and come up with new ways to reach this very dispersed audience?
So I'll go back to that in a second. I want to talk about Minions.
Oh,
Can I go back and talk about Minions for a second? So what's amazing about the Minions is, so Chris and his creative geniuses create these little henchmen who, from a business person, is fantastic, because you don't have to hire people around the world to revoice them. They're really cost effective for the movie. But then he gets to the Minions movie, the movie from 2 years ago, and the challenge was you had to take your henchmen and actually create personalities out of them, which was so hard and so brilliant, and successfully done. And of course, Pierre, the director that Chris mentioned, likes to tweak Chris a little bit. So of course, the star of Despicable Me 3 from the Minions is Mel, which is not coincidental. Somewhat related to your name a little bit, I think, right?
Well, the name is related, Meledandri, and the hairline is related. So when you see the movie and you see a minion that has a hairline like mine, who happens to be somewhat of a jerk in the beginning of the movie, which is also, I think...
He's subversive.
Yes.
Yeah.
He has tattoos, doesn't he? Is that
Oh, yeah.
That I can't tell you.
They're all going to see the movie tonight, but you'll see Mel and you'll see a lot of similarities. Not completely. But so the marketing question, I actually think that is, that's one of the great challenges as things break down in a fragment, is how do you market, how do you find a way to tell people, it's one thing to create an amazing movie, but the thing about the movie business is, 6 months before the movie comes out, nobody's ever heard of the movie, nobody's seen it, and you have to create this tremendous awareness and desire for the movie to get people to get out of their houses and get in cars and go to the movie theater. I think you have to continually do things that are different. I think one of the things that's been great about Chris's company, Illumination, is that marketing process can't just be a marketing group coming up with trailers and putting them out. It's got to be collaborative. We do things very early. Chris's group comes up with shorts and content that goes online, and different promotion. Last year for the Minions, 2 years ago for the Minions, we actually had every Amazon box that went out at Christmas time was themed to the Minions. And then, as you get closer to the movie, we kind of have this secret weapon at Comcast, which is Symphony, which I came from Disney long ago. I thought it sounded kind of hokey to me. It sounded like a play on the word synergy and how they use it Disney, but it's real. And what happens is at Comcast, everybody kind of gets behind a project every month and puts the whole promotional power of the company behind it. And Chris Meledandri's films are always the beneficiary of that. So right now we're in the middle of Despicable Me 3 being in Symphony. So every channel within the NBC Universal lineup, the homepage at Comcast on X1 are all geared towards making Despicable Me 3 work. CNBC, helps us out. And what's interesting is, the film group probably is more a taker of Symphony than a giver. We try to do our part for other things, but generally speaking, we're a beneficiary. And you'd expect to see jealousy throughout the company. We're doing all this promotion for you. But what's amazing in our company is you see pride. After last year, we had 2 original hits. I'm sure we're going to talk about in a second. Out of the mind of Chris, and after each of them, you just felt a pride across Comcast that they could help make that movie a success. So it is a little secret weapon we have that works pretty well, and you have to have that these days because there's so much noise out there.
Yeah, speaking of, so these hits from last year, I feel like today in Hollywood it's all about IP and franchises that are based on comic books or video games that sort of come with these built-in audiences, to the point that a new idea feels like a risk or is considered a big bet. Last year, Illumination had 2 original films, Sing and Secret Life of Pets. What was the origin of those films, and what convinced you that those were bets worth taking?
Well, the origins of the film, both films came from me in terms of just either ideas that I had been thinking about, what's your pet doing when you're off at work? Just that simple notion, and always just projecting so much personality, into my own pets, and whether it's a parakeet or a dog, or when I was little, a cat, and imagining all of these, this extended life beyond your interaction, and reading into their, expressions of warmth and fondness, and I think that's one of the great thrills of pet ownership is just the belief that the relationship in their lives are deep, and Sing also was something that I had been thinking about this type of movie for many, many years, and looking for just the right expression and the right time to do it. It's a little misleading, though, when I say they came from me, because they come from me, and then I am surrounded by the most sort of brilliant collaborators, and together we birth these ideas. Look, I am a big believer in our responsibility and our opportunity lying in the creation of new stories. I get a tremendous, I'd say support, but it's even more than support, which is, really encouraging pressure from Jeff and his colleagues to continue to go and to be original. Whereas, you read trend stories that change, depending on whatever last weekend's releases are, about, the need for the attachment to pre-awareness, the attachment to sequels. I think that what we found with pets is that here's an idea that has kind of a warm familiarity to it in a positive sense, which is because, any of us who have had pets, most of us have shared in that same wondering that I had. So, when I started in the business, we used to call that a high concept. And that was an idea that, you could just say the idea and people would go, oh, I get it. And that's not just for marketing ease, it's because you're tapping into sort of the collective consciousness of thought. And so, for us, the secret.
Sometimes with a high concept, though, then you got to actually come up with a story and characters. It gets harder, right?
Well, it does. I mean,
Not to interview Chris, but Nicole.
Please go.
It was, look, we were convinced from the earliest conversations that there was a movie in this concept, and that we were going to make it. Defining the story became, a challenge, because effectively there is, you could say, something slightly inorganic about it. But I don't really get to choose how the process evolves. If something's exciting me, we pursue it, and then, and then we just kind of fill in around what we have. And defining those characters and shaping that story you know, were enormously challenging, even if you went to the movies and said, oh, that story doesn't look too challenging. But believe me, that process is, it just takes a tremendous amount of time and focus. So, but for us, you know, and Sing was similar, maybe not quite as universal in its core idea, but we had absolutely no concern about our ability to engage audiences with that idea. But as Jeff said, every single movie, whether it's a sequel or it's based on some underlying material, we all face the same challenge every time we release a film, which is, you know, in a world where there's so many different things, you know, vying for our audience's attention and eyeballs, you know, we have to find a way to really ignite engagement.
But I agree with you. I mean, I think there was a period of time when, like, the elevator pitch, you know, those would sell for millions of dollars, and then I feel like Hollywood would figure it out later. But I feel like now it is harder to get those kind of films made. And I mean, if Jeff, if you could talk about Get Out, which I think is kind of your example, earlier this year, a film that was made for less than $5 million by Jordan Peele of Key and Peele, who one would never expect, you know, to be a horror director, and he goes and makes this film that's very moving and scary, and it's become one of the most profitable films of the year. I mean, how did that film get greenlit? And is that sort of a model that you'll be embracing more, that you think other studios should?
Yeah, so we have a model. We have a guy named Jason Blum, who's one of our partners, who long ago was a big movie producer, made The Tooth Fairy and some other big Hollywood movies, and decided that he wanted to make smaller movies. His original concept, by the way, which is kind of fascinating, is most movies are not made in LA anymore because of tax incentives. Live action movies, you go out and you make them in Vancouver or Atlanta or somewhere else. And so that's a hard part for actors and actresses and filmmakers who live in LA because they want to see their families. So Jason had a concept that I can make a cheap movie. I can convince all these high talented people to make a movie for me for almost no money because I'm going to have them home for dinner every night, and I'll shoot it in LA. I'll shoot it in a short time frame, and then I'll have them, and I'll say to them, "You're not making any money, but you're gonna get a big piece of the back end." And so we have this deal with Jason where he makes movies for $5 million or less, and he basically has an automatic green light. He doesn't have to get anybody's permission, even though it's our $5 million, our money. He just kind of sends an email saying, I'm making this movie, and the green light comes when you see the movie. So he makes about 9 to 12 movies a year. You see the movie when it comes in, and Jason will either say, this didn't come out the way I wanted it to, and it'll go through Netflix or DVD or whatever, and you know we'll make our money back. Or it'll be, oh God, this movie's great, and then we'll go release it. Or it'll be something in the middle. Get Out was actually, interesting enough, at the beginning, wasn't a clear cut, for sure we're going to go wide with this movie, because it was a hard movie to market, right? And so we actually, and I have to be honest, I saw Get Out, my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, who thinks Chris walks on water, which he does walk on water, but she sees all of Jason's films early because Jason sends her the horror movies, and she loves horror movies, and Illumination are her two favorite things. So I watched it with her, and it was a pretty good horror movie, but I have to admit, I'm a white guy. I didn't get the racial part that much. I mean, you get it a little bit, but you didn't get how clever and amazing the movie was at the first viewing of it, and I didn't really get it until the trailer was cut. And it's a good lesson about the movie business. One of the many that I've learned is that the movie business isn't just the creative process of making movies. It's this creative process of how do you sell people for the movie, and the two things have to come together at the end to get people to go to the movie theaters. And I think with Get Out, we were able to find a way to market the movie to get people in, and then once they saw it and they saw how brilliant it was amazing. But I think this concept in this crowded world of having different models where movies find their way to the customers, I think is a great model, particularly now that for the ones that don't make it to the top, you have lots of ways to monetize them and get them to the ultimate consumer.
And I mean, let's talk a minute about the Illumination model, speaking of budgets and being sort of sensible and efficient. I mean, you're making movies for less than half what your competitors are. I think what's like average $75 million or something, whereas most Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks Animation up until recent, well, we'll see where that goes. But you know, those are like 200 plus to make. And I don't know if people here realize most of your production's in Paris. It's a completely different studio. Can you just talk about that model and how you're able to make these films for so much less money? I mean, is it sort of creative animation techniques, or how are you doing this?
Well, we went to Paris when we started the company with Universal about 10 years ago. We went to Paris for one simple reason, which was talent. Because our process does not work unless we have world-class talent. And the competition for digital artists in the United States at that time was just too fierce for a startup. The only two countries that had a mature enough CG market where we could potentially bring together 250 to 350 world-class artists was the UK and France. And I happened to just click with a small group of people in France who we ended up a few years later acquiring. So the decision was based on going to where the talent is. The idea of making films efficiently was really all about sustainability. I just believed that if we could come up with an efficient model, that we'd have a greater chance of our business sustaining through ups and downs. And so we kind of started with that premise. Look, you can make a movie for you know, Jason Blum being a perfect example. You can decide, you know, you can almost pick a number and then say, okay, now how are we going to engineer a production to fit that number? The challenge with animation is once you're making a movie at, let's say, $150 million and you're an existing studio, there's an artistic culture that develops around making movies for $150 million. And when you try to back off of that budget, the artistic culture of the studio becomes extremely vulnerable. So for me, I was kind of starting with a clean slate. I found a company in France who was probably, there were about 75 to 85 people. They had never made a film before. It was very similar to what I had done at an earlier time when I acquired a small company that was about 50 people for Fox when I was previously at Fox. And then we began to build it out. And what it enabled us to do is it enabled us to take risk. It enabled us to pursue an idea that wasn't kind of an obvious idea for an animated film, a story where your villain, who is normally your antagonist, becomes your protagonist. It enabled me to work with two first-time feature animation directors, neither of whom had directed a film before, a studio that had never made a released film before, a composer in Pharrell Williams who co-composed with Heitor Pereira, who had never composed a score before. So it allowed us to pursue artistic choices that had tremendous vitality and vibrancy, but didn't have track records where they had done that before. And so the culture of the company was born out of choices like that. And I would say that the biggest, I'd say the biggest challenge that we face as a company, who has been exceedingly fortunate to have, you know, an incredible partnership with Jeff and NBC Universal, who's had great success. The biggest challenge that we face is keeping our culture at a place where we continue to embrace risk. because the very success that we've enjoyed is an invitation to begin to play it safe. And when you think about the world that Jeff described earlier, that we cannot succeed looking into the future unless we manage to hold on to that ethos where we are going to continue to take creative risks and not become victims of our own status quo.
And I mean, you're very hands-on as a producer of all of these films, yet you're also running Illumination. I mean, I think both of you have this in common. There's a creative aspect of your job, and there's the business side. Can you just talk about balancing that and sort of how you prioritize or how you kind of move between those two areas?
I think the movie business is so complicated and relentless, and we do at Universal 40 movies a year, which means we have a movie almost every week, which means we have at any given time 40 or 50 movies in production and hundreds of movies in development. We have this $500 million a year infrastructure around the world, which makes us a studio where we're releasing films in every platform and every language and dubbing and everything. And then all of that is wrapped in an industry that, as we talked about at the beginning, is scary and changing. And if you just stay where you are, you're gonna die eventually. So this is overwhelming business, and unlike the TV business, I know we've talked about this before. There's no seasonality to it. It just is relentless from 40 movies a year every year to the end of eternity. And it's easy to lose sight, I think, in my job that you're actually at the core of all this relentlessness and complications and everything is art. It's a business of art. That's what it is. And you're dealing with artists and you're dealing with creative people. And I think on one side, that can be frustrating sometimes because they're not always normal people. And on the other side of that, it can be amazing. And you just see, you gasp sometimes. I gasp as a business person sometimes when I see something that is so beyond anything I could even comprehend creatively. That's wonderful. I'll tell one with Chris. Sing, which is probably my favorite Illumination movie. Chris probably doesn't know this, but Sing is my favorite Illumination movie. And I know why it's my favorite Illumination movie, and that's because when I first saw it, I saw it with my wife and my daughter, and it was a different movie for all three of us. Like for me, I don't know how many people have seen Sing, hopefully everybody, but for me, the story of a dad and his son was the story which made me emotional. For my wife, it was the story of Rosita, the underappreciated but very talented, housewife. And then for my daughter, it was the snarky Ash teenager rolling her eyes and thinking all adults were idiots, which of course we are. And when you kind of see a movie like that as a business person and you see the amazing creativity that comes out of Chris's head and his team putting it all together, it just makes the business wonderful. And I think for me, the challenge has been the best way to manage a creative business is to be there to help and support, but stay out of the way and let artists be artists and filmmakers be filmmakers and create their magic without any of us business people getting too involved.
I mean, but that takes a tremendous amount of faith, and to have faith takes discipline, because it is a business that has at its core is an artistic endeavor, and I'd say for movies like ours where we have hundreds of artists working on a single film, I'd say it's even a more concentrated version than a live action movie where you have fewer people who are in control of the artistic destiny of the film as you're making it. But what then happens is that the experience of making these movies is that we're all living in a gray area for a long period of time. It's all very nebulous, you're especially again with animation, which takes years to make. So you're making a movie over the course of 3 to 4 years, and for most of that period of time, you're only getting glimpses of what the potential can be. And you just have to have faith that somehow it's going to all come together, which is easier to say than to actually do and practice. Because when you're in that sustained nebulous period and you are responsible for whatever the amount of money is for that budget, it's a lot of money, whether it's 75 or 150. And then, that's when fear can set in. And I will say one of Jeff's secret powers, and this is, I really mean this, because, is that either he has no fear or he can compartmentalize his fear in a way that I've never seen before.
Compartmentalization.
Okay, well, which is critical, because to me, the whole, the sort of the challenge of the film industry remaining creative, comes down to managing our own fear. You guys talked about the changing nature of the world and what's changing around us, and the eruption of all of these other compelling forms of media. Well, yeah, it's exciting, but as you said, it's also can be a little overwhelming. It can be terrifying. And so, the natural instinct that is when you're facing things that are frightening you is to close in and become more conservative. Ironically, we have sort of a perfect storm, because we're exposed to the world changing around us, at light speed, but we also compound that with success. And success also invites the same kind of, if you're unconscious about it, success invites sort of, well, let me just keep doing the same thing that I've been doing because I'll be successful. And that's a default setting in all of us. And so the combination of looking at this changing world, enjoying the success, the temptation to become arrogant as well with the success is really, I think, what certainly at Illumination, what the big objective that we have to grapple with moving forward.
And speaking, just to talk about some of these fears, my question is, how are they affecting the types of movies you're making? I mean, the fact that kids are watching movies on iPhones and iPads, I mean, do you think that affects, do you think about that while you're making a film, how it will play on those platforms?
I don't. I think about, for me, my orientation is first and foremost a cinematic orientation. So I'm more thinking about how do you keep the experience in the theater compelling than I am about, how is it going to play, on my iPhone. But I'll tell you one way that it's affecting us is that the bar keeps being raised, which is the only safety net that we have is an aspiration for excellence. And I don't mean that excellence defined by every movie being a blockbuster or every movie winning an Academy Award or getting, 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, in whatever your intention is for that film, achieving it on a level that is distinctive and has discovery and is satisfying. And as Jeff said, correspondingly, your marketing is equally as creative, as distinctive, and as engaging. The margin for error is rapidly disappearing. And so you have audiences who just, if you think about it generationally, they don't have the same habitual attachment to movie going and let alone cinema going, but to watching movies that we had. We have to earn every audience member every single time we make a film, and we can't take them for granted. And you see what happens weekend after weekend when you become sort of seduced into this idea that, well, they'll come because they love the last one. Well, it's just not happening anymore. I mean, occasionally something can slip through, but that's the biggest change. The biggest change is that we're in a world where the bar just keeps getting raised.
What about you, Jeff? How much do you think about these platforms just in the creation process and kind of the making the movies part?
You know, I think that we're in the movie business, so I actually think that for most of our filmmakers are thinking about it the way probably Chris is, which is how do you make the cinematic experience great? I'm of the belief, you know, that right now we're at a changing point in the theatrical experience. I think at some point windows are going to change, and you're no longer, if you operate a movie theater, you're no longer going to be able to just rely on the exclusivity of that movie for a period of time to get people in. And I actually think the change is going to be wonderful. I know they and their shareholders probably don't feel that right now, but I think that if you think about the experience of going to see an Illumination movie, everybody wants to leave the house, right? And seeing a movie is one of the two things on the planet people do. You go to dinner or you go to a movie. And, you know, I think that the experience in that cinema can be a lot more robust than it is right now. There can be things before and after, and there can be things that make that experience a lot better, so that that product that has been designed for that location can be maximized in that location, as opposed to just being a different version of your living room with a bigger screen. So I actually think theaters are going to be just fine. I think movies are going to continue to be designed for those experiences, and then I think content will, you know, find its way to other platforms as it finds it. For some people, though, their first and only viewership of an Illumination movie is going to be on an iPhone or an iPad or a PC, and that's fine too, right? It may not be the best experience, but for that person, that's the experience they get, and I think they can be equally satisfied if that's their method.
You know, another perspective though on this is less about for us about how they're going to view the movie, and more about what are the opportunities for us to adapt, to extend our movies onto other platforms, and what does that creative process become? And so, because it's very important for me that I personally stay on a steep learning curve, and that the creative leadership of our company does. The idea of being able to move into new areas and explore creative expression is something that that just ignites us. So, for example, we share this partnership with NBC Universal, who owns theme parks. So, for a themed area and a ride or a themed attraction that we did in Orlando and then in Hollywood, and now it's rolling out all over the world, is called Minion Mayhem, and so we actually put together a core creative group from the filmmaking team. We joined with the creative team at Universal Orlando, and for the first time, all of a sudden, we were working in this completely different medium. And it's not only exciting for me, but it's tremendously exciting for you know, our directors, our writers. And so we've now been moving from area to area. You know, what does it mean for a company like Illumination to be producing in an interactive space, in the digital space, in you know, making short form content? So while movies, as Jeff said, are the centerpiece of what we do and why we exist, these other forms of expression are erupting all across the company.
There's sort of an ecosystem around the film. I think now we're going to open it up to questions. So if anyone wants to raise, oh, yes, back there in the blue. Yep.
Are you working on augmented reality?
Well, it's probably a slightly different answer for Jeff and myself. We are working on ideas right now that would incorporate augmented reality. Across the industry, there are a number of different things that are being done. The ideas that we're working on right now would not be in cinema per se, but there is some very interesting and exciting work being done right now that is exploring bringing augmented reality into the cinema. So we're dipping our toe in.
But I actually think it's a similar answer. I think we start with virtual reality, right? We are doing lots of virtual reality stuff for primarily right now promotional, reasons. So we had with our movie The Mummy, we had a VR experience that, was tied to a chair and people loved it and it went all around the country promoting the movie. We're going to do something similar with Jurassic World, the next Jurassic World next year. Augmented reality is kind of cool and interesting, but I think as Chris said, the applications right now that are the most exciting are probably outside of the cinema. We have, as part of our DreamWorks acquisition, we got a bunch of different things, and one of the things we got is Where's Waldo, and you can imagine that as an AR kind of view, and so we're playing around with that. But there's so much exciting things that can happen as you're trying to think about, AR and VR and how do you tie together all these different experiences. I just don't think the business model's been quite kind of fleshed out yet.
They're up here in the blue, the glasses.
Hi, my name is Dana Montenegro. For Jeff, you sit over Universal. You have to make sure that the company delivers results, and you have to deliver some kind of certainty. And you actually talked about the creatives that you have to work with. They're different people, and they don't work that way, and they can't provide
Chris,
you.
by the way. Yeah.
No, Chris is totally different. We totally understand that. But all the rest of them,
Yeah, exactly.
They are more instinctual. They can't prove to you that what they're working on will succeed. How do you maintain within your organization, the people who work for you, a culture that allows for that level of risk-taking, that works with creatives and allows creatives a space, but still maintains some level of discipline in order to get the job done?
It's a great question. So first of all, I will say, just going all the way to the end of the question, it is one of the things that makes the movie business so awesome. Because if you're working for Coca-Cola or Procter & Gamble or whatever, there's not a lot of uncertainty. You're manufacturing the same thing over and over again, and you don't have to deal with people as you're doing that, or art. Being in an artistic business is phenomenal because you always want to succeed, but sometimes you don't, and that moment of waiting to see it is a fantastic, wonderful moment, and then seeing the emotion that it elicits is beyond the results, to shareholders or financial results or anything, which is great. I mean, Get Out was a very profitable movie, but I think at Universal we're proud of Get Out, not because of the profits of Get Out. We're proud of it. It was just such a amazing onion of a movie as you peeled each level of the onion. I've seen Get Out probably 15, 20 times, and I still see I don't know how many people have seen Get Out, but I didn't even get the Fruit Loop scene until Jordan explained it to me. So things like that are just amazing. I think the challenge is you have to kind of start at 30,000 feet. I mean, why is Comcast in the movie business? Comcast is in the movie business because we're a big platform company, and we weren't comfortable that creatively we could get commercial agreements for content that we needed as our business changed. So we bought NBC Universal, and now we're in the content business. And if you want to be in the content business for a platform business like us, you want to be in the content business for all of your customers. And we have customers that span at Comcast the whole gamut, from people who love superhero movies to people who love artistic, award-bait movies to people who love broad-based family movies. And so you have to be a place for everybody. And interestingly enough, I actually think that yields more certainty on the financial side of things, because ultimately you're in a portfolio business. Your movies, all of your movies aren't going to work every year. You just don't know which ones aren't going to work until they come together, until they go. So I think when you're actually managing your people in that business, what you do is you instill two things. One, you instill kind of a respect for the artist and the creativity. So because an amazing movie does better than a non-amazing movie, so you want to do good movies. And the only way to do that is attract filmmakers who believe that you're going to respect their talent and their process. And then I think the second thing is you have to just be competitive. You just have to want to win on every single movie, even though you don't always. So that you try to instill a culture, which I think we have, which is that mixture of competitiveness and respect for the art. And if you wrap that in a portfolio business and you manage that portfolio right, you should do all right.
Question right here, the blue shirt. Oh, yep. Too many questions.
It's two blue shirts.
Sorry.
With competition from firms like Netflix and Amazon Prime, where they have a data advantage, where they can basically take all their data and realize that customers like a certain actor in a certain role, so we're going to put that actor in this role. How do you kind of maintain your edge over the automation of movies and kind of almost dumbing down of content and keep your creative edge and don't necessarily kind of fall into the trap of competing too much with those types of platforms?
Let me start with that.
Yeah.
So there is not a week that goes by where somebody doesn't come into my office literally and say, we have an algorithm. We have figured out that we know what movies will work where and what stories are going to work, and we've broken down the stories into 17 different components, and they all fail every single time. This is not a business. You can't determine, I believe, the success of a movie based on an algorithm of data. The marketing, by the way, is a completely other story. I think there's going to be tremendous advances in how movies are marketed based on data, based on being able to target people in a much more efficient way, which the movie business is already kind of moving into. We did probably less than 5% 5 years ago of our marketing budget went to digital. Now it's 30% and growing rapidly, and that's all based on data. And there's no company in America or the world that has more data than we do. So yes, Netflix has a lot of data, but we have Comcast and Fandango and all of our movies, and we have a lot of data. The question is, how do you use that data? And I don't think you could ever use that data to determine what product that you want to put out to the customers, but you can use it for how you market, and I think we're pretty well positioned versus our competitors in that.
I would just say quickly that I kind of throw all of that information into sort of the category of market research, whether somebody wants to take it as far as to try to tell you what to do. We expose ourselves to research, but we, again, are very disciplined about saying this is just one factor that we might consider. We'd rather know it than not know it, but it's just one point along the continuum.
Oh, back in the back.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Hari. I want to go back to the discussion around Get Out and also the premise that we go to see a movie in a movie theater, and I want to kind of explore that premise a little bit. So I'm in the education field, and I teach on race. And when Get Out came out, it was such a timely movie that I took my whole class to go see it. And I've seen Get Out like 5 times now. And there's this moment that happens at the end of the movie that I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. But it's a moment that in the movie theater, the crowd response to that moment was itself a teachable experience. And so what I've found is like with movies like Get Out or with Moonlight, there's this element of audience engagement with the movie experience that goes beyond the cinema, beyond the movie theater. So I'm wondering if you've been thinking about movies like that have the potential to disrupt this premise. And so ways of crafting a story or crafting a movie for that kind of audience that may not go to see a movie in a movie theater, but may want to stay engaged in the movie throughout, so that at different levels, when you watch the movie multiple times, different layers begin getting unpacked for them. So movies that are iterative that way, or movies that break out of that box, because that might be a way to get at some of the things that you're describing with Get Out or with Moonlight that maybe traditional movies don't. And so you might be disrupted by movies that are much more interactive by their design from the get-go. So I'm wondering what your thoughts about that.
So I think there's a lot of, Chris, you jump in after this. I think there's a lot of movies, and I've seen Get Out in a theater 3 or 4 times, and I've seen it on my own or with a couple people at home 10 or 15 times, right? So I've seen both different experiences, and it is a different experience. So actually completely agree with you. And I don't actually think, not to diminish Get Out, but I think that's true of a lot of different kinds of movies. I saw Despicable Me 3 with 1,000 of my closest friends yesterday, day before yesterday, whenever it was. That is a different experience than watching it on your own or with a couple people. Comedies are very different when you watch with a bunch of people laughing and on your own. And so there is a different experience and a communal experience. Now, the flip side of that is some people will say, well, it's a different experience when the person in front of you is texting and it's bothering you, or somebody's talking behind you and it's bothering you, or the seat's kind of dirty, or the sound isn't quite right. So all these things balance out, and I actually don't think I personally, Chris disagree with me, but I don't actually think movies are meant to be watched in an audience with a lot of different people, but that doesn't mean you can't enjoy them on your own or with a small group in different mediums. And I think we have to go towards one direction as we make the creative product, and then hope it works out across different creative products. By the way, I will also say we're missing huge opportunities. If you hear Jordan Peele talk about Get Out, which I have, I go back and watch the movie, and there's 15 different things as a white guy I didn't see in the movie and get in the movie that I then saw after seeing Jordan talk about it. And I think Get Out's a particularly extreme example, but there's lots of different movies where a filmmaker can talk about their vision, and then you watch it with their vision. So why isn't that up on the screen? Or why don't moviegoers have the benefit of seeing a filmmaker talk about that? And we have to figure out a way to make the experience better in all these mediums, because people will enjoy the movies more, I think. Disagree with me if you want.
No, I want to give time for more questions,
Okay.
I think.
I think we have time for one more question, right here, in the front.
I just want to make a comment to Jeff about uncertainty. You compare yourself to other industries, which I can't speak to, but I can speak to the technology industry, whether it's hardware or software, whether it's standalone or systems. People conceive of product concepts, and there are a lot of steps between that product concept and building an engineering model, then a prototype, and there's a lot of uncertainty to get to the end, perhaps as complex as making a movie. With one little footnote, and that is we have gates in that industry. If it doesn't pass certain gates along the way, you can abort it. And maybe you should have gates in the movie-making industry where you might want to abort it.
I think that's fair. By the way, I don't think it's any different, and Chris can talk to this. You start with a high concept in a movie, you still have to get to a movie with a story and the characters and all that, which is not all that different a leap of faith. In the movie business, it's hard to stop something in the middle, though, right? Once you're making the movie, you're kind of committed at that point. Yeah, you could say the same thing about it. Yeah.
It might upset a few people in Hollywood to announce there were gates, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, could you ever shut down a production? I mean, at what point is there ever any turning back, or at what point are you fully committed? How early on?
You know, that's a fluid question, and you know, I think that there are plenty of examples of movies that have been shut down with, you know, $50 million already being spent against them. People tend not to want to talk about them that much, but you know, you're weighing, if you don't think something's working, you know, it becomes math in terms of whether you take the $50 million loss or go the distance and hope you don't lose 100. Look, I think it's if you know, for us, we're in the business, you know, sort of with a long-range view. Personally, you know, we have to always be open to dropping something if it's not working, even if we've spent a lot of money, because it's an opportunity cost as well to continue. It's not just, you know, whatever the tens of millions more that we're going to spend. It's also, what else could we be doing with that creative energy?
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you guys for the conversation. Thank you for the questions.